What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to TTP Ravens Media, bringing Ravens content every single day. If you want to see daily Ravens content, make sure to hit the subscribe button down below and hit the notification bell as well if you want to get notified every single time I upload a brand new video, especially when it comes to Ravens news. Now, obviously, I was waiting for the trade deadline to end to see if the Ravens make any moves. I waited a little bit after that just to see, because a lot of times trades come out after the deadline actually ends because, it has to get to Rappaport or it has to get to whoever ends up releasing it. And the Ravens did not make any trades. And I think a lot of people were expecting trades. Now, me, I wasn't really expecting a trade. I was hopeful that potentially the Ravens could make a trade. A lot of people had really high expectations, like really, really high expectations, like trading for guys like Allen Robinson or trading for guys that are just way over the budget that the Baltimore Ravens have. Because if you didn't know, the Ravens are sitting at about $1.1 million in cap space. So the only players they'd really be able to trade for is either really old veterans on like vet mins or players on their rookie contract, because those are really the only players that the Ravens can afford unless they were to send in, extra picks to incentivize the team that is trading them to be able to keep some of that contract. So, for example, in the Broncos to Rams trade, a lot of Ravens fans I saw were like, wow, the cap is so fake, it isn't real. So what happened in that trade was the Rams sent, I believe it was a second and third rounder, and the Broncos are paying almost all of Von Miller's contract this year. And Von Miller, in return, is playing for the Rams, obviously. So they're not taking on that cap hit. And that's how they're able to perform that trade without losing. So the Ravens could have done something like that. But obviously, they really like to build through the draft and things like that. But I want to emphasize, this doesn't mean that the Ravens roster is set. Now, I do want to have just quickly announce Chris Westry was designated to return off IR. So I guess that's good news that came out of today. But there are very well going to be players that are good football players that get released. And I think the biggest name that could potentially be released is a guy like Kyle Fuller. Kyle Fuller, cornerback for the Denver Broncos, used to be a cornerback for the Chicago Bears. And I saw his name. The Broncos were trying to trade him. And nobody ended up biting and trading for him. They're obviously selling. The Broncos are very clearly selling. They traded Von Miller. They were shopping offers on Melvin Gordon. They actually traded another cornerback for like a 6th round pick. I want to say it was to the Jacksonville Jaguars. That actually came out a little bit after the deadline. It went in through before the deadline, but it wasn't announced until after. But overall, they're very clearly selling. So do they really need Kyle Fuller? Could they cut him? And if they do cut him, the Ravens are a team that loves to pounce on those types of players that weren't given that chance. Another player that was cut today, Jalen Smith. Now, Jalen Smith has had some trouble this year. Obviously getting cut by the Cowboys, goes to the Packers, didn't play well in his Packers debut. I want to say he only played one game for the Packers. He was held out of like his first game because, didn't know the playbook and stuff like that. But I think only played about one game for the Packers. Ravens could look at him and not be a guy like, hey, let's come in and be our starting linebacker, but look at him like, hey, do you want to be on our practice squad? Like, do you want to be back end 53-man roster and work on your craft and get better and things like that? Because you used to be a really solid linebacker and you're still very young. But just because the Baltimore Ravens didn't make a trade, don't blame EDC. I saw a lot of people getting mad at Eric DeCosta for not making a splash move. And it doesn't have to be a splash move, okay? The Ravens, in recent years, they've made some splashes when it's gotten closer to the trade deadline. Guys like, obviously, Marcus Peters is the biggest name. Ravens trade a Kenny Young and I believe it was a 5th-round pick to the Rams for Marcus Peters. And he obviously came in as a Pro Bowl cornerback, changed the defense, changed the team, really helped propel that win streak. Then obviously last year, Ravens needing some help. Who do they go out and get? Yannick Ngakoue, one of the better edge rushers in the NFL, like high-profile name. I believe he's been a Pro Bowler before. If he hasn't, borderline Pro Bowl quality player pretty much every single season, or at least he had been for the last couple of years, even going back to Saxonville. And like the Ravens had been making those moves at the deadline. But that doesn't mean that they can make those moves every single time. You look at what the Ravens have done in recent years, bringing in guys like Josh Bynes. Heck, even bringing in Josh Bynes this year. those types of moves can still make a massive difference in this team. I've talked about it before that one, the offensive lineman that people wanted like Ravens to go after, teams just aren't trading them. They just really weren't trading them. There's a chance that some get cut, some get released. Ravens could very well go after a player like that gets released, but in terms of trading for a guy, like we're not. It's just not going to happen because teams don't want to trade that. In terms of the running backs, it was a possibility. I liked some guys in the market. However, again, Ravens have JK, they have Gus. When they've made trades in the past, they've looked at it like a future investment. They looked at Marcus Peters and they said, hey, if we trade for this guy and he plays well, we can absolutely extend him. He can become a cornerstone of this defense. What happened? They extended him, became a cornerstone for the defense. Yannick Ngakoue, they were like, hey, we want to trade for this guy, but we don't want to just trade for him for the year. We want to test him out, and if he's really good, we'll extend him. They didn't really love him, so they didn't extend him. With guys like running backs that people were looking at the Ravens potentially getting, there was no extension that was going to happen. It was literally going to be a 1-year rental for any player that they ended up trading for, because there's no way that they would take them over Gus and JK, because Gus and JK are making like a combined $6 million next year as a cap hit for the next couple years. So there's no reason to go after a running back. Then when it comes to the linebacker position and the defense, the problem with the defense, in my opinion, hasn't been as much in personnel. While some players have struggled, it's been some fundamentals. It's been I feel like a mental thing. It hasn't been as much of a like, oh, these guys are just terrible, because we've seen them play well before. They just haven't done it this year. And maybe that is a Wink Martindale thing. Maybe he's not calling the right plays. I don't want to make that assessment right now. Obviously, it's still pretty early in the season, because the Ravens were expecting to do one thing this year with Marlon and Marcus Peters, and obviously they've had to shift that significantly. So like bringing in a guy in trading for him, like if they got a cornerback or a safety or a linebacker or even an edge rusher, we don't know how much that would affect him. And again, they would have had to be a guy making $1 million. Or the Ravens would have to really incentivize the other team by sending more picks than the player's worth to get them to take some of that cap hit. But the Ravens, you know what? I'm not upset that they didn't make a deal. If you're upset, comment it down below if you think the Ravens should have made a deal or something like that. It's okay if you wanted them to make a deal, if there was a player you were looking at. But overall, I felt like this wasn't going to be a massive trade deadline. And it wasn't. The only player that like could have been like huge if he was traded would have been Deshaun Watson, but that was, not most likely not going to happen. It didn't happen. Let me know in the comment section down below what you guys' overall reactions are to the trade deadline. Let me know what you guys think. Are there any cut candidates that you think that the Ravens could pick up? Are you excited for Chris Westry being designated to return from IR? He's got 21 days, 3 weeks to do it. But thank you everybody for watching. Subscribe for daily Ravens content, and I will see all of you again tomorrow.